The first raindrop landed just as the sun dipped toward the horizon. A soft patter that turned almost instantly into a deafening roar of rain. What began as a gentle drizzle soon became a merciless deluge, transforming the valley's dry plains into a churning sea of muddy water. Trees bowed under the weight of the downpour. Fence posts vanished beneath frothy waves, and the river, once a lazy ribbon, swelled until it burst its banks. By midnight, the landscape was unrecognizable. A vast roaring flood that swallowed everything in its path, leaving destruction in its wake, and any creature caught unawares at its mercy. Yet in the midst of this raw, elemental chaos stood one lone figure, clinging to life against the full fury of nature's most violent tantrum. What happened next would bind two souls forever, and it all began when a wild Mustang named Storm found himself trapped in this watery inferno. Storm had always been the very incarnation of freedom. For years, he'd raced across these plains with the wind in his mane, outwitting mounting droughts, eluding cowboys, and shrugging off fences like mere threads. He was untouchable, until the flood caught him off guard. One moment, he was grazing by the swollen riverbank. The next, his hooves slid into nothingness as the ground beneath him vanished. He tumbled headlong into the current, and powerful waves ripped him downstream before he even knew what was happening. His muscles, honed by years of wild running, strained against the onslaught, but the water was relentless. Branches, tree trunks, and fragments of splintered fencing crashed into him with brutal force, each blow stealing a bit more of his strength. Twilight's last light faded as the night grew colder, the river's icy fingers creeping up into his bones. Yet he refused to surrender. Still, as exhaustion dragged him toward oblivion and the world became a blur of churning whitecaps, it seemed certain that Storm would slip beneath the surface forever. Meanwhile, miles upstream, Daniel Carter sat in his truck, staring out at that same raging flood. Rain hammered the roof, the valley below a black sea broken only by flickers of lightning. Once a soldier and then a firefighter, he had spent his life running into danger, pulling people from burning buildings, saving children from car wrecks, only to decide, after too many losses, that he'd had enough. Now, retired and reclusive, all he wanted was silence. But the sheriff's crackling voice over the radio shattered that peace. All roads are flooded. If you're still out there, get to high ground. Daniel didn't respond. He simply gripped the wheel and watched. Then, in the distance of his headlights, he saw it. A dark shape thrashing against the current. A horse fighting to breathe. For a heartbeat, Daniel willed himself to look away. He'd sworn never to get involved again. If the Mustang drowned, so be it. But when the horse's head slipped beneath the churning surface, something inside Daniel snapped. He floored the accelerator, tires screaming as the truck plowed through the floodwaters. Every spray of muddy water against the windshield felt like a slap, but Daniel didn't stop. Through a sheet of rain, he caught sight of the horse's flailing legs. It was losing the fight. Without a second thought, he jammed the truck into park, yanked open the door, and plunged into the icy torrent. The shock was immediate. Cold like 1,000 needles shot through his body, and the current yanked at his boots as though they were made of paper. Clinging to the truck for balance, Daniel waded forward until the water hit his waist, then pushed on. Storm's head bobbed beneath another wall of water. Heart pounding, Daniel lunged, fingertips brushing wet fur, and then the Mustang lurched in panic, hooves connecting with Daniel's ribs in a bone-shaking kick. Pain exploded through him as the river claimed him, dragging him down. His lungs screamed. Darkness closed in. A voice echoed in Daniel's mind. This is how it ends. But deeper down, something refused to let go. He kicked toward the surface, vision dim, lungs burning, until at last his hand closed around a soap rope that lay tangled beneath the waves. He yanked. He broke through the surface, choking in freezing air. Storm was still out there, just beneath the surface, and Daniel reached again. This time, fingers grazed fur. He held on. Storm thrashed wildly, every panic-driven muscle straining, not knowing friend from foe. Daniel wrapped an arm around the Mustang's neck, breathing agony in every gasp. "You're not dying today," he growled into the wind. The current fought to tear them apart, but Daniel's grip held firm. Closer and closer, they were swept toward a submerged oak. Its roots lay like outstretched arms offering salvation. Just before they were carried past it, Daniel snatched a low-hanging branch with his free hand, yanking with all he had until both he and Storm slammed against the sturdy trunk. They collapsed on its knee-high roots, chests heaving, battered but alive. For a long minute, the world was still, save for the storm's roar and 2 ragged breaths. Daniel's entire body trembled from the cold, from shock, from the raw joy of survival. Storm lay against the oak's broad base, battered, soaking wet, sides heaving. His black coat clung to ribs and muscles, every breath a testament to his fight. Daniel dared a soft laugh. "You damn horse," he whispered. Storm's ears twitched, a weak snort escaping him. But their respite would be brief. The flood still raged around them. The water was creeping up the oak's trunk. To survive, they'd have to move. And not just to any ground, but to a distant high ridge barely visible through the sheets of rain. A quarter-mile away stood a patch of solid earth. Between them and it churned the flood's most furious currents. A vortex of uprooted trees, splintered fences, and swirling undertows. Daniel glanced at Storm. The Mustang's eyes, once wild with fear, now held a flicker of trust. An idea struck him like lightning. He spotted a length of barbed wire tangled around the trunk. Half submerged. Pain barely registered as he pried the wire free, twisting it around Storm's chest to form a crude harness. The metal bit into his palms, drawing blood, but Daniel didn't care. He fastened a makeshift lead and whispered, "All right, big guy, time to move." Storm didn't budge. Daniel exhaled, bracing himself, and tugged. At first, only a faint tremor answered. Then, with a grunt that shook the oak's roots, Storm inched upright. Their eyes met, man and horse bound by the ordeal, and Daniel let out a breath he didn't know he'd been holding. Then came the hardest part. Each step through the flood was a battle. Daniel's legs burned, his arms quaked as he hauled Storm forward. Debris pummeled them like a battering ram. A drowned calf drifted past, its lifeless form a grim reminder of what awaited them if they failed. But every time Storm wobbled, Daniel roared encouragement. "Keep moving!" Each word was a lifeline cast into the storm's maw. Halfway there, disaster struck. A monstrous wave, bearing a floating log the size of a car, surged toward them. Instinctively, Daniel yanked Storm aside as the log smacked the water where they'd stood, sending a wall of muddy spray over them. Storm reared in terror, breaking free, then pitched headfirst into the current. Daniel's heart froze. Without thinking, he dove after him. Darkness swallowed him again. Beneath the surface, Daniel's arms clawed at the void until they found the Mustang's slick flank. He latched on, wrapping himself around the animal's neck, and kicked for the surface with the last ounce of strength he could summon. Then, lungs bursting, they broke through together. Daniel hauled them both toward a narrow shelf of rock, solid ground that felt like a gift from heaven. They collapsed side by side, water sluicing off them, hearts pounding, bodies trembling. Silence settled between them, punctuated only by Storm's first ragged cough and Daniel's rasping laughter. For a moment there was nothing but relief, pure, overwhelming relief. Storm's eyes flicked open, meeting Daniel's. In that instant, a bond deeper than words was forged. Dawn began to break, the storm spent, but the flood still raging. Daniel rose, every muscle screaming, and offered a trembling hand to Storm. The Mustang, too weak to stand alone, placed a hoof on Daniel's outstretched palm. Together, they moved to higher ground, one step, then another, side by side, survivors of nature's most brutal test. They had both been lost to the flood. They had both clawed their way back. But as Daniel felt Storm's trembling shoulder beneath his hand, he realized this wasn't just another rescue. It was a second chance, for the horse, for the man, for a friendship born amid chaos. Sometimes the ones we save end up saving us. If this story of survival and second chances moved you, please give it a thumbs up, subscribe for more tales of courage, and share it with someone who believes in the power of hope.